Bear Essentials podcast gives older bears a place to gather for real talk regarding topics and issues that they can relate to. Here at the Bear Essentials, we aren't just having conversations. We are looking to provide actionable intelligence through real-life experience and expertise of our guests. Our mission is to build a strong community that elevates and motivates people to go beyond their limiting beliefs by helping them realize that getting older is not an excuse to hibernate on their goals, but a reason to work harder.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. I am extremely excited to bring you today's interview. He is a former NFL player. He had a career with the Cincinnati Bengals, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Los Angeles Raiders. He's also an actor, and he's been in films with Burt Reynolds, and I'm sure you'll remember this. He was Swede from Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood. So please, without further ado, let's jump right into my interview with Pete Koch. Hey, Pete, how you doing? Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Charles, my pleasure to speak with you. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, Pete, me also. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Yeah, Pete Koch. I am an actor, a fitness professional, retired NFL defensive end, and grew up in Long Island, New York. Went to the University of Maryland, captain of a conference championship football team there, first round NFL draft pick, 6 seasons in the NFL, and then I kind of segued into acting. And the through line, I would say, of everything I've done in my life has been attention to physical fitness and strength development. And I shortly after my playing days were over, and I was acting and doing some stuff. But hey, I mean, I wasn't working all the time as an actor, and I didn't want to be the proverbial, waiter or work in a bar or anything like that. So it was easy for me to know that I needed some more formal education in terms of getting certification. I'm a guy with a liberal arts degree, but I went to school and got some really strong certifications, actually became a certified strength and conditioning coach. And I've been trying my best to help people for 35 years in the area of physical fitness, weight control, eating healthy, and optimizing the way that we go through our lives as we age.
Yeah, and Pete, some of the stuff I'm a bit ashamed or embarrassed to say this. And we'll get into this a little bit as far as your acting career, but I came across you on social media, on LinkedIn actually, and it was a post about health, fitness, and I seen someone who definitely looked familiar as far as age to me. And I'm always interested in trying to, see people similar, see their struggles and see what they're doing to overcome it. And then I started, doing some more research on you. And I'm really glad we're connecting today, because you're doing not only your background in the NFL, your acting career, but what you're doing now is extremely a blessing for all of us and people our age, because I think it's really valuable. So, Pete, were you growing up? I know you said you were captain, conference champion in college. Was athletics always a big part of your life growing up?
Yeah, it was. I'm the youngest of 4 boys, and my dad was the proverbial, in the spring, he'd sign me up for Little League. In the winter, it was sign me up for basketball. And then in the fall, it was sign me up for youth football. So by the time I was 7, I was a 3-sport guy, and there was no turning back. And that was a big part of my life, because it was where my closest friends were. It's where I learned about camaraderie and working together as a team. I think athletics are extremely important, and they should be included in the lives of all young people. But I also see the world a bit divided between individual sports and team sports. I'm biased towards the team sports, and and I've got great friends that were, almost singularly focused on like tennis, or I got a friend that was an All-American wrestler in Division I college, and his sport all the way through was an individual sport, wrestling. So, but you come away with a different set of a different toolkit, really, I think. But working together with people, as all of us grown-ups know, is pretty darn important.
Right.
And the things I learned, is the lessons that I learned. I was very fortunate to go to a powerhouse at that time, not any longer, but high school in New Hyde Park, Long Island, New York. And we had a championship football team there. And we sort of had like dual head coaches, co-head coaches, and they that was Coach John Calo and Angelo Giuliano, and they had such a profound impact on my life, and that we didn't have anything sort of special about the athletes that at my high school, but we won almost every game that we played because we were so unified, and we cared so deeply and respected each other. And for one, I'll give you one silly example, and you don't see much of this in football anymore, but when we got in a huddle, and whether it was on the offensive or the defensive side of the football, we were instructed that we were going to hold hands. We just formed an oval shape, which is traditionally how it's done. There's less of this now. The more modernized the game has become, there's less huddling and more signal calling at the line of scrimmage. But back, this was the 70s, and so we'd hold hands, and it seems so. I don't know. I don't even know how that sounds to other people, but you got 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and they're holding hands. And we'd all clap at the same time as we broke the huddle, went to the line of scrimmage. But and then we'd reunify. So I describe football to people, whether you're a fan of the game or don't know a thing about it. But football is, I heard a great definition that I don't know who came up with this. I can't claim ownership, but football is violence 6 seconds at a time, broken up by 30-second board meetings. And that's the huddle. Right. So you get the whistle blows when the play that ends the play, everyone gets up off the ground or whatever, gets back together, offensive side, defensive side, and they call. And then we decide what we're going to do next in that huddle, you might say, and then we repeat. And then once the ball is snapped and 11 players battling on 11 other players, it gets quite violent for about, on average, 6 seconds. And the lessons that I've learned have served me well.
Yeah. And then so when you're in high school, and I know it was back in the 70s, I think it's a little different now, but were you highly recruited out of high school into college?
I was recruited, but not highly. I suppose it's relative. Like, by the time I got to University of Maryland, which is I had plenty of guys that came in with my class. It's about 15 or 18 guys that usually come in per class. And there was some guys on the team that were recruited by 40, 80, 100 Division I schools. I was recruited by 6. And I narrowed those 6 down to 4. I took 4 visits, and then chose, of course, Maryland. But I was not highly recruited, but it was a blessing, because without that opportunity, I don't know how things were gonna go for me. I didn't have much of a plan B. I didn't have very good grades in high school, and so that was going to limit the opportunity of where I would go. Because they do stretch the rules a little bit at times to get athletes, into a school. I was a benefactor of that, and I'm very grateful for it, because I'm one of those guys that when I was 18, I was football is what kept me together. It gave me a purpose, and it kept me on the rails because I didn't have any notable leadership happening at home. So for those of us that, or then or now, that don't have a lot of a great leadership happening from mom and dad, sports can be a lifesaver. I know it was for me.
So you saying that, Pete, in high school, do you have, you look back and did you have that leadership role model in football that you looked up to that kind of started to push you along the way?
Yeah, was the like I said, we had you kind of a unique situation. It was like we had like co-head coaches of varsity. And by the way, I went to a combined junior senior high school. So I played on the freshman team. I went from youth football to playing on the freshman team and then the JV. But I played JV when I was in 9th grade, and then I went and played the varsity in 10th grade. Is the one I was, in my case, the one 10th grader on the varsity, and that was a championship team. And so the coaches had said to me, I was very tall and I was very thin, but I was fast and I loved the game of football. I was passionate about it. And for those that have played contact football, they're as you get older and the kids get bigger and the game gets more violent, some kids just kind of, they disappear. They don't want to go out for the team anymore. They leave the game. Everyone kind of hits their limit. For some kids, it's when they're 7 years old, and others, they get to be, 14. They're like, I don't really like this anymore. And because it takes a special kind of a person to embrace that contact and collisioning. It was Vince Lombardi, I think, who said, football is not a contact sport. Dancing is a contact sport. Football is a collision sport, right? So, but I had all my coach, John Kalo, he says to me, Pete, you got all these things going for you. And this is when I was 15. And he said, however, you're weak. I mean, you're skinny, weak. But you can fix that. And that's on you. And we got a weight room and you got to find it. And we will help you lift the weights there and with the other kids, the older kids. And that's on you. And I just put my arms around that. I started buying the muscle magazines because there was no magazines or books or websites that you could Google, like, well, how to train like a football player. You could find a million websites on how to strengthen your body to be a better football player now, but you couldn't find anything back then. So bodybuilding was what I gravitated to. And I got Arnold Schwarzenegger's poster and put it on my wall. Dave Draper, if you're old enough to remember, he was actually the Mr. Universe and a great predecessor to Arnold Schwarzenegger. So Dave Draper was a role model for me. And I just wanted to develop my body and somehow figure out, I had a good feeling, and getting stronger actually, when done right, makes you fat, not only more capable of inflicting more upper body violence, which is good as a lineman, as a defensive end, but also makes you faster and more powerful overall. So I began to dominate the other kids generally in high school, which positioned me, even though I was still pretty thin when I graduated. Give you an idea, I'm 6'6", and I guess I weighed about 230 pounds in high school. And I went to college, and I went to a college that had a great strength and conditioning coach named Frank Costello. I put my arms around that, and then one of the reasons that I was so attracted to go to the University of Maryland was I wanted to develop my body, and I felt like it was the place that I could go to best realize my potential. I knew that I was nowhere near it. Like, I was just skinny, but again, I was still tall, fast, and those things you can't teach. All right. So I knew going in. So I committed myself to the strength program and just practicing my tail off every single day. I did not start until I was a senior in college. But I was also at the same time voted as captain of the defense by my peers, and I hadn't even started. So that that made me feel like all that work that I was doing and preparing myself for that chance to be the starter, that it was being recognized. So that was good for me. Felt good.
And then Pete, I mean, obviously you put all that work in, and you say you don't start till senior year. When does it really start to become like, hey, the NFL is a possibility? Were you even ever thinking about that?
For any person that goes and plays athletics at the D1 level watches their older teammates, go to the next level. In baseball, it would be probably the minor leagues, and so I had seen guys going to the NFL, and I kept on calibrating and thinking, like, what would that take? But it was very simple. It wasn't complex. It was keep doing the work and you got really two things to worry about when you're a Division I athlete. Number one is the academic side, because if you don't keep yourself, in class and studying and doing acceptably well, then the rest of it's going to go away, and it's a shame, because it's a shame to see somebody with athletic potential have it undermined by the fact that they weren't disciplined enough on the academic side or socially, to get drummed out of school. And that's really disappointing. And that's the kind of stuff that every Division I athlete saw, and I saw, and I said, that won't be me. And then let me take care of business on, practicing and getting better. And that includes it's much different now, but the off-season training back when I played in the early 80s was very, very intense. Off-season that's where you really built up your body with your strength training, and they'd bring us out on the track, and we'd run 200-meter, 400-meter, incredibly difficult conditioning workouts. And that's where, so they would say, during the season, you're going to be a football player, but we're going to spend the whole off season making you a better athlete. Right. And without the pads on, and that's the way it went in college. That's pretty much the way it goes now. It's an evolving process. And I did want to play in the NFL. I didn't want to let myself get lost in that dream, but I just wanted to, at the very least, know that by the time I finished college, that I had given it my very best.
Yeah, that's with a lot of things, right, Pete? No regrets. And obviously you didn't leave anything on the table with, no regrets there. So you get drafted. What round did you get drafted in?
In the first round. I was the 16th player picked.
And I know you played the Raiders, the Chiefs.
It was actually drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals.
Bengals, okay.
Yeah. And you know what? I didn't last with that team. And it was a very difficult time, because, the truth be told, that at the position that I played, defensive end, the Bengals had two outstanding players that were in their prime, Ross Browner and Eddie Edwards. I love those guys. And so I was like there to learn from them. And while I got better and began, I only started one season in college. I was very raw, and we were playing. They played a very different type of a defense, so it was like learning a new position. So I went through, and I guess the Bengals decided they just didn't see the future in me. It was a very strange first year in the NFL. I didn't play much, and then in training camp the second year, they tried to trade me. So, I guess they didn't find anybody, and they cut me, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. It didn't feel like it at the time, that's for sure. It was demoralizing, but I was there's this thing called a waiver wire in the NFL. So with it for 24 hours, other teams, there's a sort of a pecking order of things, but they have the opportunity to claim you. And I was claimed by the Kansas City Chiefs. And so I got on a plane, fly to Kansas City. Somebody picks me up at and here's a story of leadership, by the way. And so when a runner from the organization of the Chiefs picked me up, and says, look, you're going to stay at the hotel. However, the defensive line coach, your positional coach, wanted me to, and it would, by the way, most of the Chiefs, like most teams, their practices ended by the time you got through your last meeting, took a shower, went home. It was usually about 5 or 6 at night, because you start pretty early at about 7:30. And so by now it was much later than 6 o'clock at night. It was about 8:30 at night, but because I got in late, and so the runner takes me, but the defensive line coach, name is Walt Corey, and he was a former player for the Chiefs who segued into coaching. And he says he wants me to bring you by the stadium. So we drive right to Arrowhead Stadium, where I had never even been. And who's waiting there? And this is before everybody had a cell phone. He's standing there, and it's my coach, Walt Corey. And he said, Pete, I know you've been through something. I don't know what happened, and it's nothing that we need to talk about, but it didn't go your way in Cincinnati. But I just wanted to be here and shake your hand and welcome you to Kansas City, and say, if you're willing to work your ass off, and I think you are, because I know who you are, and I think I know your potential, then this is the right place for you. And there's no rush here. We've got our starters in position, but we think you're just going to make us better. And that's why we claimed you. And that was the beginning of what turned out to be really when I got my NFL career on the rails. So in just 4 days later, we had their season opening game. And by the way, NFL teams use different lingo, depending on the type of an offense or type of a defense that you're running. It's really as dissimilar as if you're in France, they speak French, and you go to Germany, they speak German. Well, I had to learn this whole new language. And it was no way I could learn it all in 4 days of practicing and reading the books, but I tried as best I could. And so we play our opening game. It was a road game against the New Orleans Saints. And they said, look, we're just going to play you just a little bit. So just be over here on the side and be ready to go when maybe somebody out there needs a blow, needs a rest. And, I just about figured out where to line up, and I go out there, and I ended up having 2 sacks in that game. And it was, I can't even explain it. I guess it was a combination of excitement, and I had so much I felt I needed to prove, and I was very, very focused, and I felt like, wow, they were giving me an opportunity to fail or pass right out of the gate, because the head coach had said, I'm going to guarantee you 2 weeks on the team. The rest is up to you. Oh, so that's an important detail too. So I knew I had 2 weeks, and that's how it came out of the gate. And after the game, the head coach says, hey, you're one of us. That was great. And Walt Corey, I was thankful for him for putting me in the game and giving me a chance to play. And it went from there. In those 4 years I was in Kansas City, I ended up having some injuries and some surgeries and setbacks, but all in all, I was that was a highlight of my football career, and I'm very grateful to. It all started with Walt Corey, waiting an extra couple hours just to greet me, and that was a lesson in leadership and love I'll never forget.
Yeah, I'm really glad you told that story, because that's the kind of stuff that really that helps motivate me, and I think other people too. And I think it helps I know a lot of people that tune in for my show are trying to be leaders, right? And it's things like that, hearing that and understanding that. And it's almost like I heard somebody say before, it's easy to kind of manage people, right, Pete? But like a true leader, they're actually changing culture, and anybody can manage people and they can do a great job while they're there in front of you. But I think what he did there for you, it was like he set you off on a path to be good regardless of whether he was there or not. That was just something pretty amazing. So thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. So I wanted to ask, as you're in the NFL, I think from what I understand, because it was a little different back then, right? Back when you were playing, like, I don't think the off season was as strict as it is now, right? You guys were able to pretty much live wherever, just stay in shape. But isn't that what afforded you the opportunity to start to bridge into acting somewhat?
Yeah, it's exactly right. Because when I was in high school, and I told you that story about how I was, my coach said, you got to get stronger, you got to get stronger. And so when the summer would come around, the gym, the equipment that the strength training equipment that we had at my high school was not very good. And it was, if people can remember what an old universal multi-station machine was, they were silver and had red handles, and we had one universal machine, and that was about it. And a handful of maybe 3 or 4 sets of dumbbells, and that was it. And I had a friend that was interested in bodybuilding. He actually didn't play on a football team. And he said, hey, I heard that there's this pretty cool bodybuilding gym. It's not in our town. It's a couple towns over. It's about 10 miles away in a town called Limbrook. And I was going to check it out. And my buddy had a car. I didn't even have a car. And he goes, you want to go? And I was, yeah. And we walked in there, and it was like this is 1978, old school bodybuilding, hardcore, converted from an old grocery store. It was a hardcore bodybuilding gym, and we joined, and that became the place that I would really go and develop my body for the next couple of years. Whenever I wasn't at the high school, I was there at Rab's gym, Rab's gym. And I met a guy named Perry, who was about 9 years older than me and pretty buffed. And he became like a big brother, kind of a friend. He was a friend, but he was older. And, I'm 17, he's probably 26. And he owned a small business. He worked in New York City, and we would get talking, and he was very supportive of me. And one day I said, what do you do? And he goes, I own this little small business, and I just 5 days a week, I drive into New York City, which is just a half an hour drive. But he goes, however, make no mistake about it, I'm an actor. I got a commercial run. I had a commercial running, and I did an off Broadway play last year, and I'm going to make it. And it was just like that. It was just like that. And he was a true struggling actor and had been working at it for years. And we stayed in touch all those 4 years. I went away to college and then the NFL. And then when I finished my first season in the NFL, he says, what are you going to do? And this before everybody had a cell phone. So you had to figure out a way to stay in touch with each other. And I go, I don't know exactly what I want to do. I don't want to live in Cincinnati. And then it was Kansas City. And he says, listen, I'm going to move. Like, I'm literally getting ready to move to Hollywood because I want to trade in New York City. I want to go for it. He had a little problem with his business. He goes, I got rid of it. And this is time to take that step. This is it. This is the big moment. He had a couple of friends in LA, and he moved, and he got a small apartment in the San Fernando Valley. And he says, come visit me. And I did, because I didn't know exactly what to do with myself in the off season. I was single. I knew I could live anywhere. I didn't want to live in Cincinnati at the time. And because most of the guys that stayed back there were married and had families. And I knew that I could, if I had access to a gym and a place to run, and Perry was a very strong, fit guy. And I said, would you work out with me? He goes, yeah, of course I'll work out. And he says, look at this acting that I'm doing. And he goes, you can do this. You can do this. And he just like that, like he gave me that confidence. And I said, he goes, look, here's a script. I'm going to read a portion of the script for an interview. It's called These Are the Sides. I'm going to read the sides. I got this audition tomorrow. And he started telling me all about the business, helped me get an agent. helped me get started, took me to an audition, introduced me to a casting director for a Ford truck commercial. And I walk into a room and they're looking for a pro wrestler type guy. They want you to wear a tank top and the leggings that everybody was wearing in the 80s. And I walk in this room and I see like 250 guys. It's packed, just standing room only. And Perry, and we dress the same way. And he walks over to the casting director that he knew, and he says, crash. I mean, it'd be like crashing, but could he participate in this audition? And she said, "Why, Pete, you look," she's a lovely woman. She was a big commercial casting director. And he goes, "Pete, you look great. Are you in the Screen Actors Guild?" I said, "No, I'm just trying to learn the business." And she said, "I shouldn't do this, but you look fantastic. Yeah, sign in your name right here and put your phone number next to it." I booked it. Then I was in the Screen Actors Guild. That's how it works. You got to kind of wedge yourself in there by hook or crook. My buddy Perry goes, "You son of a gun." I knew this would go your way, man. I was off and running.
That's fantastic. So now, were you at one point were you kind of juggling a little bit of acting and the NFL? When does it become that kind of crossroads where you go, you know what, I need to go this direction now?
Well, I knew I was going to play football as long as I could, and it's such a, it's okay that it works this way, but at any given time you've got about 1,600 players in the National Football League, and even your most avid fans can name about 10% of them. They can name probably most all of the starting quarterbacks, but that's just 32 guys. And when I was in the league, there were 28 teams. They've expanded since then. But they could name some running backs, like my teammate when I finished with the Raiders, and Marcus Allen, and they knew Howie Long, and they knew Joe Montana. But when it gets down to like, oh, that defensive tackle, or that the guy that plays a left guard, or the backup tight end, nobody knows your name. And so I was with that guy. I was the blue collar guy. I was doing pretty good, and I was starting in Kansas City eventually. And but you're just going to play as long as you can. And there's that rare guy like Marcus Allen says, "Oh, this is going to be my last season," or Drew Brees a couple of years ago said, "That's it. That's my last season. I'm going to go right into broadcasting." But that's the tiniest 1%. The rest are just going to play as long as you can. And just when things were rolling along like this for me, and I'm starting and things are going good in Kansas City, I blew my knee out in a game. I ended the season for me. And then earlier in the season, I had broken my wrist, and I was playing with a cast, and I needed surgery on the wrist. But they asked me to see if I could make it through the season with this cast on my wrist. So now I'm on knee surgery, on crutches. All of a sudden you felt it, like the wheels were starting to come off. And I had a third surgery. I was released by the Chiefs and picked up by the Raiders, where I tried to rehabilitate all these. I had these 3 surgeries and then Al Davis calls me up and he says, I was a fan of yours when you were playing for the Chiefs, but I know you've been through a lot. And here, the way I see you fitting it with the Los Angeles at that time Raiders is, can you back up Howie Long? I said, I'm your guy. I understand that roles do change that way. And that got me one more season in the National Football League, as my body was just falling apart at the seams.
Yeah, that's so you kind of, as that's happening, Pete, are you in your mind, are you kind of like you feel that this is it? You feel like the end is happening, and does your mind start to go into the next phase?
Yeah, and during that time, I was working in every off season, again beginning with Perry's encouragement. So I had spent, by that time, I got to the Raiders, 3 off seasons And I had shot probably a dozen commercials, another 10 guest stars on TV shows, and I was in about 6 or 10 movies, including working with Burt Reynolds in a film called Heat and Clint Eastwood in a film called Heartbreak Ridge. So by the time I got to the Raiders and, got in that locker room in the off season, I was going over there to the facility to do my strength training and the running and the conditioning. And I'm meeting guys, and a bunch of the guys were like, "Hey, you're that guy." They didn't know me from the Chiefs. They were like, "Hey, I saw you in Heartbreak Ridge," or "I saw you on that episode of Dallas." Or "I saw you in that Taco Bell commercial." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm doing that too." And they thought it was great. And they embraced that. And then of course I would talk to my agent and my people, and I'm like, let's see if we can, when football ends for me, that was my intent, to keep it going. It's harder than it looks to keep it going. And that's why I'm fortunate and I prepared for it. But I also knew that, I was, the whole time, the thread that took me through was fitness, strength training and fitness and nutrition. And I knew I had a lot of knowledge and advantages over other, coaches and trainers, because I had worked with, for example, the Raiders had a fantastic strength and conditioning coach named the Mother Dunn, who I still stay in touch with. He just recently retired. He actually went from the Raiders to the Giants, won a Super Bowl, and then the Baltimore Ravens and won a Super Bowl. So he's a lauded strength and conditioning coach that was, all part of the people that were influential in terms of not only my development as a defensive end in the NFL, but somebody that I could learn things from when it came to the importance and the ins and outs and some of the biology of strength training.
Yeah, and that's one thing, even talking to you now, Pete, I noticed that I feel like there's a lot of times where a lot of us things are happening for us or to us, right? But sometimes it's up to us to pick and choose, right? To listen to it and to actually act on it. And that's where I think you've done such a great job in transitioning from, football to acting, and then to even what you're doing now. Before I get into what you're doing now, though, I had two people. I told them I was interviewing you, and they made me promise. I had to ask you, what was it like, Heartbreak Ridge, to work with Clint Eastwood?
Well, it's interesting because I have a story that I think above all speaks to the man that Clint Eastwood is, and I couldn't have written it, and I think this might be, I've been interviewed a few times, but this might be the first time I think these stories came so close. And just as I spoke a few minutes back about my defensive line coach in Kansas City, Walt Corey, staying at work at Kansas City at the Arrowhead Stadium an extra couple hours just so he could shake my hand when I got there. When I had been cast up against all odds, up against hundreds of guys, I went a very traditional route. I auditioned on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, California, and then I had a callback, and I read a few scenes, and against hundreds and hundreds of guys, the script read, Swede enters 6'7", 285 pounds. Hey, I'm 6'6", 280 pounds, pretty close. And I had the age was right, but you can't believe how many guys they were between Hollywood and New York that they auditioned for that role. But I got it, and they said, okay, you're going to start in 2 weeks, and you're going to shoot it at Camp Pendleton down in San Diego. It'll say Camp Lejeune in the script, but we're not going to North Carolina. We're going to shoot it here. And they said, we want you to, and they had already been about my character, Swede, doesn't come into the movie until about an hour into the film. And although the movie was not shot sequentially, they had been shooting the movie about 2 or 3 weeks by the time I came up on the call sheet to work. And so at the prescribed date, I was called, and I went and I drove down. I said, check into this hotel the day before. and at such and such time, and then you'll be working and shooting this scene the next day. And so I got down at where they sent me at the right time, and a production assistant met me in the lobby and says, "Hey, Pete, check in your room, put your bags away." But it was in the early afternoon, and this was in, I guess, July. And he goes, "But they asked me to take you over to the set, which is, on Camp Pendleton." So I jump in his car and off we go, and you got to go through the gates and show your ID and all the stuff that it takes to get onto there. And he drive like this. And they took me and come over this hill. And then I see a crew of, 70, 80, the camera, the lights, all the electric, all that stuff going on. I see the actors, and they go, "Come on." And there was this sort of a hill about 40, 50 yards away from where they were shooting this scene. And they said, "Just hang out here. Just hang out here." And there I see Clint Eastwood. And of course he directed the movie too. And he's doing his thing. He's directing, he's in, and then there's cut, I was 15, 20 minutes. And I see Clint pivot around. I'm the only guy standing over here by myself. Everyone else is actually working. I'm just spectator. And he comes around. I'm like, holy cow, he's walking over here to see me. And he said, "Hey, Pete, it's Clint. We're so glad you could join us. We're going to have a good time on this movie. We appreciate you being here. It's going to be some good fun."
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic.
And he goes, "You can just hang out here if you want. You just tell them, they'll take you back to the hotel you want to hang out here. That's fine. You just do it. Just tell them what you want to do, and I'll see you tomorrow." And back to work he goes. So leadership, I mean, you can't understand as a young actor how much anxiety I had at that moment. That was my first film. I had done a couple commercials and TV shows, but this is a whole nother place. And I was worried, oh my God, can I remember my lines? What if I stink and they replace me? Everything was going through my mind at that time. And because it felt like I jumped over everybody to get into a Clint Eastwood movie, but he cast me himself, and all that anxiety, my shoulders, it all came down.
Well, I can say this too. When I told them I was interviewing you, and they mentioned, right away they referenced Heartbreak Ridge and Swede. And do you find now that are you pretty recognizable from that movie for that character? Do you get that a lot?
Not so much recognizable, in out in the street, although it does happen from time to time. And the last time it happened was last summer. I was visiting a friend in Austin, Texas, and it was a guy who was prior military, which is probably no surprise. And I was sitting at a restaurant on a Saturday afternoon with my friend, and a guy comes up and says, "Hey, sorry to bother you. Aren't you? Are you the Swede sitting here?" But in terms of on social media, it's been very interesting journey, and I try to I really didn't have any connection, so to speak, to the military when I was a 23-year-old actor, got cast in Heartbreak Ridge. My father fought in World War II, and if he were alive, he'd be 100. I was the youngest of four, and he was one of those guys that came back from the war, and he didn't, I wasn't. He was 40 when I was born, and by then, he just would not talk about the war. I couldn't, I knew he was in France or something, and he was in artillery in the army. I couldn't tell you anything. He didn't tell any of us, his children. You wouldn't talk about it. And it's just kind of a shame, but that's how he felt. And so I just didn't have any association. Then I worked on Heartbreak Ridge, and I got around I played a recon Marine, but the guys that were around us in our group who didn't have any dialogue, us actors that didn't have, but they were real recon Marines that were handpicked and chosen to be the extras. And when the cameras weren't rolling, they doubled as technical advisors. to us, and it was very, very helpful. And I learned so much, and I developed such a respect for the military. And then on top of that, over all these years later, social media, which is, dominates everything now. And if you got an old picture of something that you did and somebody relates to it, and Heartbreak Ridge is on TV all the time, then people, generally, not always, but the people over the last 20 years in particular that have reached out to me and commented, 99.9% of it positive, and how it's crazy to me, really. It's flatteringly crazy that people say to me almost daily for all these years that, hey, in some way, I, in the character Swede, influenced them joining the Marines, or maybe the Navy or the Army, and or that their buddy from their big buddy from high school got the nickname Swede because he somehow resembled me. So it's been a trip.
That's so awesome, man. Thank you for telling that. So, I mean, obviously you've done a lot in your life, and I always find it, to me, I think it's pretty amazing. Not even amazing. It's just so, like, it just shows to me that there's still good people in this world. When I think of somebody like you, Pete, who has had the career you've had, and now you're kind of pivoting a little bit later in life, and you're really out there trying to do a lot to help other people. How does that start? And has that always been something that you've always been trying to do or wanted to do?
Yeah, I think when I was first in many years ago, involved in fitness and personal training, and people would say, well, I bet you want to train athletes, right? I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, I know what that's about. And pretty early on, it was clear to me that there was a lot of folks back then. I really started to get into working with folks in my early 30s. And I'm like, I could already see a lot of regular folks having difficulty maintaining their weight or really exercising properly, and understanding, its impact on their health and their energy levels and all kinds of things. And I got deeper and deeper into the topic of general fitness. So, training to be the kind of training you do, for example, doing exercises as a defensive end, you're probably your strength coach will have you doing hang power cleans and plyometric jumps. And if you don't know what that stuff is, I don't blame you. It's very specialized, high level athletic stuff. And regular folks don't need to be doing it. Regular folks need the basics, the fundamentals, and understand how important strength training is on so many levels, but for developing your muscles, like if you ever had your arm in a cast and you took it out 8 weeks later and it got thinner and skinnier, you'd say, oh man, my forearm atrophied, but it'll come back, it'll get back. Well, the opposite of atrophy is hypertrophy. And that's when we build muscle up. And so as we age, we tend to atrophy our skeletal muscles, right? So I just explain to people, it's so important that you maintain, if you haven't started, to start, but then to maintain strength training as a very, very regular, important part of your life. It's more important really than cardiovascular training, where most people tend to emphasize things, but they're at least equally important. And so I began to get that message out because I knew I could help people, and I had the advantage of knowing a lot about building muscle, hypertrophy. And then I was training people and then helping design programs, which is what I do now. So I can train people virtually and talk to them about how important it is to build and maintain muscle, because particularly once you get past the age of 40, to build any muscle is very, very difficult. And if you're a woman, it's much more difficult. And in women, it's particularly important. That's why I have so many women clients, and they're at a greater risk for diseases such as osteoporosis, where their bones are getting weak. And you go, well, how in the world do you stop your bones from getting weak and you getting bent over, as you age? And I'm like, well, the answer is strength training. Is putting your muscles, right? So by the way, all of us, right, are 206 bones, 646 skeletal muscles. All right, we've got about 360 joints, right? So, and then a central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord and the nerves that tell your muscles what to do. So how does that work, right? So that your brain tells your muscles to turn on, so I can go like this and make a muscle or lift my arm over my head. And that moves what? My skeleton, those 206 bones that I've got. And so you keep the bones healthy by exercising the skeletal muscles. That's your strength training, and that's critically important. Otherwise, you're going to lose not only muscle mass, but bone mass as you age, and that's a disaster. So to keep people healthy, strength training needs to be prioritized. And then you want the foundation, you want to back that up with a nutritional foundation of eating the right foods and dietary protein in particular. So I've been passionate about this for a long time. And unfortunately, our society, our population here in the United States, 80% of the adult population is overweight. And that's just a disaster. And about 40% are obese, 10% morbidly obese, which means you're 100 pounds or more off the mark. And that's no bueno at all. And a lot of people are simply baffled by how to, get out of the mess they've gotten themselves into, heavier and heavier as they've gotten older. And they say, oh man, what am I going to do? And that's where I try to help people, including my messaging on social media, which is making you better 30 seconds at a time, where I just try to offer little bits of information. It's free, and just to help people and hopefully motivate people. I'm 60, and if I can keep it together, I believe you can too.
Yeah, and Pete, I mean, those stats that you just went through, it's crazy. I know when I kind of went on my own journey, I'm 50, but I know when I started to read more about it and educate myself, and I started to read about things like sarcopenia, and I won't lie, it scared the hell out of me. And I don't think enough people take it, not even that they don't take it serious, it's just they need that push sometimes, and they need to see people like you, lesser, like somebody like me. But it's just, I think the message is there. Like, this is critical for everyone. And when you hear those stats, it's staggering. It really is. And I mean, do you find that people that you work with, do you find they come with you when they get to you finally, or they start talking to you, are they almost in like a desperation phase at that point?
I think I find a couple of different groups of people. Number one is I get super achievers, actually, where, like, I'm thinking of a woman I've been training for virtually, almost 2 years now. She lives in Chicago. I've never met her in person, but we get together once a week on Zoom and go over her training. I write the training programs, and then we modify and kind of massage the training and the food as we go along. And because it's a never ending journey, and her body's changing, good, bad. Sometimes she feels better. Sometimes the weight goes up, weight goes down. So let's keep on tweaking this. She hired me because she wants a partner in this, because it's very difficult to look at yourself and figure out how to do it, especially if you don't have all the formal education that I have. And I always make it clear to people, look, I got a liberal arts degree, but I'm like Avis. I try harder because I don't have a degree in exercise science, but I've got a ton of, that's why when I was in my 40s, I went back to night school. I took physiology, anatomy, and I wanted to understand biology, and I wanted to understand how these systems work on a more deeper level, so I can have a conversation with anybody, including a doctor, and maybe talking about a patient with a metabolic disease, and at least be able to understand that language. And so I get folks that are looking like they're already doing pretty good, but they were like, how do I go to the next level? And then I get people that are like, I feel overwhelmed by the place I've gotten to in my life. And I think like maybe can you guide me through that? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, we all feel, listen, we all at times we all feel overwhelmed by something in our lives. Me too, of course, all of us. That's the way human beings work. But when it comes to physical fitness, I don't get overwhelmed because it's what I've committed my life to. And I'm pretty darn good at writing programs and helping people uniquely personalized to them get from point A to point B. I know what point A is, where you're at today. You don't feel very good. You're overweight, blah, blah, blah. Let's quantify that. Maybe do a DEXA scan or a very accurate way to measure your body composition. Bone density would be important as information you can share with your doctor. It's my doctor of 30 years, internist Rob Huizinga, who was, by the way, the supervising physician on The Biggest Loser for 17 seasons. And before that, he was the Los Angeles Raiders doctor. That's where I met him for 14 seasons. Harvard MD, All-American wrestler at Michigan before that. So this guy, and he's a workout nut. He's a workout nut. That's what, by the way, how do I find a doctor? I say, you know what, it's not easy. And especially if you're in some kind of, big group, but if you can find your first line doctor, family medicine or internal medicine, if you can find a workout nut, go with them. I don't care where they went to school, but show me that they got some skin in the game. And so, yeah, that would be my advice on that. But then get somebody, if you have the wherewithal, but if you're looking for somebody to align yourself with a coach, decide what you want. Some people just want a female coach. Other people would like somebody who's more oriented on maybe preparing for a marathon, which really isn't my thing. And I don't recommend most people think in those terms. I recommend that people prepare themselves by getting stronger, so meaningfully getting stronger. And that's really where I present my focus and expertise. But it's the quality of life. I say if you're going to spend 40 minutes a day, strength training, or 40 minutes a day on an elliptical trainer, and with the objective of 20 years from now, being able to get off the toilet, that's a big thing, by the way. The number 2 reason that people call an ambulance, the number 1 reason people call 911, say, I need to send an ambulance, please, I need somebody. Number 1 reason is shortness of breath. Pain in my chest, I have a shortness of breath. Number 1. Number 2 is I can't get off the ground. I can't get off the toilet. Same thing. Number 2 reason.
Wow. Well, Pete, I think you're doing a really, really good thing here. And I think for anyone, whether it's you or whomever, I think your point that you make is so valid. I know for me, I needed it, right? I've been working with a coach now for the last 3 years. And
Great.
It helped me with accountability, but it also helped me with, and I'll admit this, and this is where I think guys like you come in and my coach, I don't know the answers. I don't know, like, you guys are skilled at creating the workouts and doing it, right? Like for me, I don't need that extra burden of having to think that through, right? I want to be almost pointed in the direction and say, do this, do that. I'll do whatever you tell me. And that's the way I like it. And that's why I highly recommend guys like you and fitness coaches, especially the reputable ones. So Pete, I wanted to, for anybody to want to get in touch with you to maybe, hire you or check out what you're doing, is there any places you would recommend them to go?
Yeah, I'm easy to get a hold of, and I welcome folks that want to follow me on, it's Pete Koch, PeteKoch and you choose your platform, Instagram, Facebook, and most, my biggest, sort of a group of folks I connect with and interact with is on LinkedIn. But I don't know even know why that is, but whatever your preference is, usually get a hold of. If you have a question, just direct message me, and if you're interested in training on it. But I promise, when you find me, and I've got a website too, but you don't need to look at that. But if you find me on social media and you want to take a minute to see some of my 30 seconds at a time episodes where I offer some fitness advice, just scroll back and just go through there. I've posted more than 400 making you better 30 seconds at a time moments where I discuss mostly strength training, but also cardiovascular fitness and nutrition. And it was Einstein who said something. And I read this quote some years ago, and it caught my attention. He said, we should aspire. It's important that we aspire not for. I want to get this straight. Not to make money, but to be of service to people. And I'm paraphrasing that a little bit. The actual quote went out of my mind. But so here's a very thoughtful guy. Guy spent his whole life just thinking things through, very complex ideas, thought. And he says, it just came back to me. Aspire not to be a man of wealth, but rather a man of value. Mm-hmm. And look, it's cliche to say we live in a society that's consumed with making money, and we need to make money, right? For pretty much most of us need to, or else we're going to have a big problem on our hands, and that's important. But to find a place where you can add some value to maybe somebody within your life or outside of your life, if you have an opportunity to do that struck a chord with me. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And that's when I decided that I had so much information, good stuff that I could articulate pretty well and demonstrate in about 30 seconds, because I think that's about most people's attention span. And so there you go, making your better 30 seconds at a time.
Pete, you're definitely providing service, and you're definitely showing a lot of value to others. And I think it's not just with the whole strength and conditioning and all that, and your NFL career, acting career. I think you're just a great example of being a good human being, and that's. I feel better for having had a chance to meet you and spend some time with you. And I think the audience is going to feel the same. So thank you for that, sir. I greatly appreciate it. And definitely been a highlight for me. So thanks again, Pete. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles. Very kind words. I appreciate you. Thank you. Keep up the good work at your end. And First thing I think I mentioned to you when we connected was congratulations on losing a tremendous amount of weight. It's an accomplishment, and it's not over. Right? For nobody is it over. Not until the very, very end. So you're going to stay at it. I'll stay at it, and I'll see you at the top.
I love it. Great way to end it. Thanks, Pete.
You
take care.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
listening. And
Bye
remember,
now.
never hibernate on your goals.